Your comfort zone starts where the questions you ask start making the experts uncomfortable. But then you aren't even here for anything comfortable. Not for a cushy job, not for a 9 to 5, not for a fancy Your comfort zone starts where the questions you ask start You're not made to settle for anything less. But then you aren't even here for anything comfortable. You're not here to write code. You are here to rewrite the future. You're not made to design games, not for a 9 to 5. You are here to change the game. Fancy comfort zone starts where the questions You're not here to mark your attendance. You're here to leave your mark on the world. You're not here to be created for jobs, but to have jobs created for you. You're not here for the purpose of making a living. You are here to make living full of purpose. You're not here to upgrade your skills. You are here to upgrade the life of millions. You're not here for the rat race. You are made for the human race. You are not made for anything small. In fact, you are not made for anything less than creating a dent in the universe. You are here to upgrade the life of millions. Be made for big things. You're not here for the rat race. You are made for the human race. You are not made for anything small. In fact, you are not made for anything less than creating a dent in the universe. You are here to upgrade the life of millions. Be made for big things. You're not here for the rat race. You are made for the human race. You are not made for anything small. In fact, you are not made for anything less than creating a dent in the universe. You are here to upgrade the life of millions. Be made for big things. You're not here for the rat race.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. January is filled with a lot of hope for the rest of the year. And similarly, IIT Madras Alumni Association is also hopeful to transform and amplify its two main missions for the next 2 years, Mission 5,000 Ignited Minds and Mission Million Smiles. Today, in this event, you all contribute to these missions, and we thank you very much. To know more, please do visit our website, www.iitmaa.org, and fill up the volunteer form to be involved in our programs. I would like to thank our sponsors for IITMAA Sangam 2021, Hero Wired and Active, for the generosity in helping us plan and execute this program over 4 months. I now would like to invite Mr. Venkat Ravi from 1971 batch of Civil Engineering from IIT Madras. Ravi also went on to do his MBA from IIM and completed that in 73. He has had an illustrious career in the IT industry with companies like TCS, HP, EDC, CMC in India and abroad. He is very active in the Alumni Association from 2010 as a treasurer, vice president and president, and also active in PALS and IITM outreach program to improve the quality of education in other local engineering colleges. He's a part of the IITM Wednesday group since its inception in 2008, which is helping IIT Madras improve their infrastructure, ranking, and quality of education. This group has collected over 100 crores during the year-end 2021 from alumni and corporate CSR funds, and Ravi received an appreciation award by Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director, IIT Madras, recognizing his contribution. So lovely to have you here, Ravi. Over to you. Ravi, you're on mute. I kindly request you to unmute.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Nishani, for your kind words. Respected Kris Gopalakrishnan, respected Dr. Gagandeep Kang, Krishnan, President, Shamala, Secretary, Nishani, Director of IIT Madras Alumni Association, and IITM alumni from all parts of the world. Good evening and good morning to you all. From Venkat and Ravi from 1971 batch. Indeed, my pleasure and privilege to say a few words about Sangam and today's Fireside Chat, and also formally introduce our speakers, Kris Gopalakrishnan and Dr. Gagandeep Kang. As you all know, Sangam is the flagship event of the IIT Madras Alumni Association, which represents over 5,000 alumni of IIT Madras across the globe. It is one of the largest networks of alumni gathering of one institute at one platform. The theme of Sangam for the current year is restoring balance in STEM with a strong focus on women in STEM and also inspiring young girls in STEM. The Sangam event, of course, this year is held from the month of December 2021 to March 2022, where we got various programs and during various periods, which would be a mixture of virtual and hybrid events. Of course, this program is virtual, but one or two are also going to be hybrid. The key lights of the programs are as follows: balancing globalization, local economy, growth and sustainability, convenience and privacy, and restoring balance in STEM, which are very relevant in the context of the current acceleration in technology and innovation. I lead initiatives around women in STEM, which include Women in Leadership, Entrepreneurship Forum, Mentoring and Wellbeing Programs, Women and Research and Academic Forum, and more. We also have got some special programs and contests to create awareness in these topics among some 15,000 students of IITs. Now let me formally introduce our speakers. Well, Kris and Dr. Gagan. Well, Kris, he doesn't need any introduction at all. Distinguished alumni of IIT Madras, co-founder of Infosys, retired from the company in 2014, currently runs a business incubator called Axelar Venture in Bangalore. Also funded and created Itihasa jointly with Mr. Krishnan, who is the president of IITMAA. It is a digital application that chronicles the evolution of India's IT industry. Dr. Gagandeep is a rare researcher with a refreshingly honest voice for science during the pandemic, and also known for her interdisciplinary research studying the transmission, development, and prevention of enteric infections, the sequences in children in India. She had developed practical approaches to support public health, also had built national rotavirus and typhoid surveillance network. She was awarded the prestigious Infosys Prize in Life Sciences in the year 2016 for the contribution to understanding the natural history of rotavirus and other infectious diseases. She was the first Indian woman to be elected as the Fellow of the Royal Society in the year 2019. A few words about the event. As part of our 4th edition of Sangam, we are conducting a fireside chat between Kris Gopalakrishnan and Professor Gagandeep Kang, focusing on this year's IITMAA Sangam theme, Restoring Balance in STEM, Science, Technology, and Engineering, covering their interests, ideas, and trends. Kris Gopalakrishnan will share his views and experience leading one of the most successful IT companies, as well as his multiple interests and involvement in philanthropy, research, and science, and Dr. Gagandeep on her journey and approach to support public health, vaccine trials, and the study of relevant problems in India. The session consists of a fireside chat for about 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer session for about 45 minutes. We should be moderated by Nishani, Director, IITM Alumni Association. Over to you, Kris and Dr. Gagan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, IITMAA, for giving me this opportunity. It's always my pleasure to share a stage with Gagandeep. We have had wonderful exchanges. I also recommend that you listen to Gagandeep's speech at Infosys Prize Award ceremony this year. It's a wonderful speech on many of the subjects that we are discussing today. The topic, restoring balance in STEM is a very interesting topic, and I've been struggling actually to figure out how do we discuss this, and then of course you gave some pointers on some topics to discuss, so I'm going to kind of mix that and with my own perspectives, and Gagandeep knows this already that I don't follow any text actually, but let's see how it goes. So let me start off by the first point that we want to bring about, which is about the need to develop local capabilities, local IP. In any economy, the long-term benefits will accrue if we are able to create our own products, services, IP, etc. But research also benefits from sharing knowledge with people around the world, because many of the problems facing the world are global in nature, and we need to leverage the work that's done by others. I think Isaac Newton famously said, right, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So sharing is something that is needed to promote or to progress in science. So and Gagandeep, of course, is not just famous in India, but famous around the world. First Indian woman on FRS. So that's my first question, Gagandeep. To how do we balance between the need to progress in science by collaborating with the best in the world, while making sure that we create a competitive economy here in India. So let me put that up to you first.
Well, let me start first by thanking IIT Madras alumni for inviting me to join you. It's always fun talking to you because you pose difficult questions that make me think about what the framing should be and how to fill in that frame. So I think this question of balancing what is global, what is local, in science and technology and in society, really, you need to look backwards to be able to look forwards. And if we look at science in India, historically, India was strong in science. That's not a story that is often told. But when we had colonial powers in charge, there was a development of Indian science on a Western paradigm. There were some people who stood out in being able to do well within that system, but still advance their science. So Jagdish Chandra Bose is an example, right? But when we look at what happened to the country after independence and where we are today, in many ways, we became a hugely socialist society that decided that it was going to focus on building capacity within the country. So the establishment of the IITs, the building up of IISc, which happened from the beginning of the 20th century up to now, the IITs from the 50s and 60s onwards. These were institutions that were established to create excellence within the country. And that scientific excellence did develop. But along with that came a degree of insularity of our industries needing to build things from scratch. And that started to change in the 90s when you had the economy opening up. That kind of paralleled the fact that in many ways, science and research became easier to do than it had been in the 70s and 80s. Access to the rest of the world became easier, but we tended to close up when it came to collaboration. Somehow, along with the opening up, in science and technology, there was this feeling that we will be exploited. And that is a mindset that certainly in health, but in many other areas has persisted over time. We are great generics manufacturers for drugs. We are great vaccine manufacturers as long as these are low-cost, old platform type of vaccines. Everything else that is new technology is not something that has been developed here. And I think a key reason for that is that we have not engaged globally in science and the applications of science in the way that we could have in the past 3 or 4 decades. I think that is something that needs to change, that we need obviously to have certain protection mechanisms for ourselves, but we also need to understand that if we want to compete in the rest of the world, we need to be forward-looking and think about how we achieve competence and an ability to be excellent on an international stage, not just a national stage. Many of the science institutions in India are very happy to be the best in India. The best in India is not good enough. We need to be competing with the rest of the world.
Yeah, so let me, look back at my own industry career, where from day one, the IT services industry was global, and before that, in the 60s and 70s, India gave access to the best of the computers to our scientists and engineers. IIT Kanpur started an MTech program in computer science in the 60s, and then pretty soon in the 70s, that that got propagated to Institute of Science, IIT Madras, and the other IITs, etc. And fast forward to today, I believe we have the best IT professionals. In fact, Indian IT professionals kind of dominate the top echelons of businesses and industry around the world. And we have a very, very competitive world-class IT services industry in India today. And when I look back, I think it's the early access to the technology, being world-class from day one, and having the confidence to compete with the best in the world. I think that's what has allowed us. And I strongly feel, with my limited experience supporting research, I feel that our scientists are as good as scientists anywhere else in the world, given the proper scientific infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and the right environment in which they can. The right environment includes guaranteed funding, which I believe is very much important, very much needed. I also have been pushing for increased funding for research to 3 to 4%. Now CII has come with a new number, which is 4% of GDP. This budget season, right? So increase the research funding to 4% of GDP. I think these will definitely help Indian science to actually leapfrog and in new areas. And what is also, I believe, very opportune at this point is that there are so many new emerging areas, that we can take advantage of these new areas and leapfrog or become leaders in some of these new areas actually. And so Gagandeep, in that sense, I want to get your perspectives on another balancing, which is the balancing between privacy and sharing. So for example, when you look at one of the advances in the area of healthcare, medicine is personalized healthcare, preventive healthcare, etc., where if you are able to or you're asked to share your data to get certain benefits. So how do you see this area of medicine? Even when you look at public health, right? We are in the COVID season. Access to data is extremely important. We need to know, which is the variant that's now prevalent, etc. So sharing versus privacy, where do we draw the line? How do we, create the policy framework for managing this? What are your perspectives?
So I'll take that from two angles. One is, when you look at all these MSc programs in bioinformatics and areas that are very relevant to the development of competence in precision medicine, what are the data sets that people train on? All of the data sets that are used in most of our educational institutions are not Indian data sets. They are data sets that the NIH or somebody in Europe or the UK has put out on a public server that can be freely downloaded and accessed as a teaching tool, as a research tool, to get insights that you wouldn't otherwise have. Now, this is done taking into consideration what are all the identifiers that need to be removed in order to protect that person's privacy, the person whose data is being shared. And the last time I looked, the HIPAA requirements and other requirements require something like somewhere between, depending on the data set, somewhere between 20 and over 100 identifiers to be removed from that data set. So you require people who have expertise to know what allows for re-identification and make sure that you remove that without compromising the quality of the data set or limiting your ability to be able to analyze it. Now, do we have that kind of competence in India? I think in India, if we decide to do anything, we absolutely can do it, but we have to make a commitment that this is the approach that we are going to take. Instead of which, what we see in regulation of data is not being regulated by data experts. It's being regulated by generalists where the default option is not to share. So you have to overcome a large hump to be able to get them to even think about how data can best be shared. Now, if data is the next gold, and given the size of India and its population, I think we have incredible learning opportunities for ourselves, not only from the data itself, but how to manage the data, how to share the data. And the sooner some of the research investments that you spoke about can focus on process, I think the sooner we will reach a point where we will be able to not only take from global databases, but also contribute to databases. One of the successes of SARS-CoV-2 has really been INSACOG and how INSACOG has been set up to contribute to global databases in a very timely fashion. I think that's incredible, but it's for one virus and it's only from the public sector. They don't even let the private sector contribute sequences that they may be generating to this global database. And I think that is a mistake. And we should be thinking about what are the ways in which we can get around it. Now, you've been in this area, you've been with CII, you've specifically been leading this group on genomic surveillance, and you've come up with a set of recommendations for the government. Are there general lessons that you can take from the discussions that you've had that apply not just to genomic surveillance, but to
Sorry, I missed that last bit actually.
So I was thinking, you've been looking at this idea of generating capacity, the ability to do things, to generate data. Now, what are the lessons that you've learned through this process that you think apply to pathogen genomics, but also in other fields that are related to health and outside of health?
Yeah, I was fortunate that I was made chairman of the non-personal data framework for Government of India. And we came up with a set of recommendations for sharing, as well as, of course, the CII task force on genomics and how to take advantage of the opportunity that genomics provides. There is a way, as you rightly said, that we can make this data available, and this data, this shared resource is very much required. Of course, it has to be anonymized. We have to ensure that privacy is protected, especially there is no harm to the individual by contributing this data. That's the key, requirement actually, and make this data available for research, make this data available for innovation and entrepreneurship as a public resource. So in our recommendations, what we have said is that we need to look at a structure like a trust or a society, a trustee who is given the responsibility to manage these shared resources. So they are actually a not-for-profit entity. They, of course, are allowed to charge a certain fee so that they can maintain this database, make sure that its security, its currency, all that is kept up, and make this available for research, innovation, etc. So that's a key recommendation that we have given. And in the area of genomics also, some of the recommendations are around making the shared databases available. We also went further to say that cooperation between public sector and private sector, government and private sector is very important, and we need to allow for greater collaboration, even when it comes to research funding from government. We need to now look at more private participation in some of these research activities. So those are some of the recommendations that we have given. I just want to push this further a little bit in terms of this restoring balance discussion. Sometimes in science, the repercussions of an innovation is very long term. I read somewhere, or I maybe heard it on a podcast, actually, somebody saying that the issues of climate change that we are facing today is the result of the success of science and technology. The innovations in the 20th century in science and technology of, for example, making transportation super efficient, being able to fly around the world at very low cost. We innovated both on the technology side as well as on the business model side, so much so that the numbers increased, exponentially, of people using these and things like that. And that's progress, and that's, the success of all that is what has now brought us this issue of climate change. We can now look at other dimensions of science, actually. So as a scientist, and we have now these vaccines, right? And we are working with this vaccine on real-time basis, right? So how do you balance between the short-term requirement and the long-term implications of these things, actually? As a scientist, how do you think about these things?
Well, there are lots of examples in science where a changing environment influences what happens to people's health. So one example of this is the rise of inflammatory bowel disease as we change our diets and we become more urbanized. The hygiene hypothesis talks about people developing more allergies because they live in too clean an environment in their early childhood. So many things that we do that we think are improvements. A cleaner house is always a good thing, or is it? So these are the kinds of things where the consequences come long after the intervention has been introduced. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to measure is to continually track data on every aspect of life as we live it. Would we know that climate change was a problem if we didn't have people that tracked the climate over a long period of time? Do we know the consequences of the many interventions that science and technology has brought us? Pollution, for example, right? We have to have the ability to measure, the ability to investigate in order to think about what our hypothesis is for how this situation came about, and then think about interventions. Because the science that brought us the problems can also be used to find us the solutions. Will those solutions have consequences that may lead to other problems in the future? They might. But I think given the scale and prioritization of climate change currently, I think there is a lot that we need to be doing in every aspect of our lives. We cannot go back to being hunter-gatherers. We cannot go back to being fully rural societies. We live in an urbanized, technology-enabled environment. What allows us to achieve balance here? What do we need to protect? What do we need to turn back? What do we need to move forward? I think we need to think in a much more integrated fashion now than we have done in the past. People who built trains and cars did not necessarily think about the pollution that was generated from the fuels that were being used. Now we recognize that as an issue. So we need to think about energy solutions that are very different from what we've had in the past. So I think this integrated thinking is something that your industry can really help us with in its ability to be able to build systems that allow us to take so much data from so many disparate sources and be able to use it. What do you think the future looks like?
So it's a very, very interesting question, and I grapple with this in my mind. I'm really not a scientist. I'm a kind of an amateur, let's say, I don't know, amateur philosopher. I don't know, but these are interesting questions, and I feel that as any living being and as humans, we change as the environment around us changes. Every second we are changing. Our brain is changing, our body is changing, everything is changing. New cells are being created, and everything is changing. And so everything that we do have consequences. Every time we learn, every time we use new technology, everything that we do have consequences. And it's only recently that we have started understanding these things better, and probably we have a long way to go in terms of understanding, the wonders of nature, I would say, learning from nature, etc. But having said that, what nature has evolved through billions of years, trial and error, we are trying to now collapse into a very short period of time, and trying to do those things in much shorter time frames, actually, and the consequences. I don't know. This is a thing that is always in the back of my mind. We don't memorize things because we have a phone which we can look at and find a contact, find a phone number. It tells us what needs to be done today. Using calendars and things like that. So we are constantly augmenting human capability with technology. The vaccine is same thing, right? We are augmenting human capability with technology. So we're constantly doing that. So much so, we are saying that nature's evolution is no more important or no more required. Because now we can create life forms in laboratories, and we can create life, and we can model, engineer life the way we want. So, this is a area where I don't know why we've got drawn into this, but the balance, now we're talking about this balance between nature and human innovation, ingenuity, technology. And as you rightly said, we can't go back. But the challenge we are faced with is there is no one view of the future. We can't agree on the view of the future. So that makes it even more difficult to discuss these things in a manner in which we can at least try and understand and reach a solution. So that balance that is required to discuss, debate, and understand, I feel, is also now being lost. And this is a challenge I see very much, because without that, we are all getting pulled in multiple directions. It really depends on who has got the upper hand, who has got control. And that's actually a very, very, probably, I don't know, very difficult word, I believe, we are getting to. What do you think?
I think the polarization in many parts of the world is really very clear. But then as people who are involved in the STEM fields, I think we have a responsibility to the rest of society to be more rational, be more collaborative. And in many ways, philosophers and people in science and technology have to show the way to the future. We need these discussions, but we also need the pioneers, the path breakers, largely from science and technology, that come up with what will be solutions that may be applied in 10 or 50 years, but people who hold out and keep looking for those solutions as the conversations continue to happen. You need to make sure, and I think probably people in STEM are more open to that than many other parts of society, in keeping the door open for conversations, for thinking about things, for being more rational in the approaches that we take to building our futures, because it really is a collective future. And isolating yourself is becoming less and less possible. Whether it is countries or parts of society, even though there is polarization, isolation is hard. So I think it does need for all of us to think about how we work together to do this. But you were saying earlier, things are changing a lot. One thing that isn't changing a lot, or isn't changing, it's changing but not fast enough, is what's happening with women and their engagement in STEM fields. Why are we not seeing more women leaders as head of technology companies or heading up institutions like IIT Madras?
Interesting. But I must say that if I look around in Bangalore, many of the IT companies, multinational IT companies, are headed by women, and also in the banking sector also I see a lot of women leaders now coming up, actually, more so than I would say in US. we are seeing that in India. You know, you probably can better answer this actually. I'm going to kind of, change the question slightly differently. You talked about the balance that is required, especially in STEM, when we look at advances, etc. Do you think more women in STEM will allow us to find better solutions, better balance, and that's something that we need to strive for now? Are we wired differently such that having more women will probably get us better long-term solutions?
I think we are wired differently. It's not just the wiring that you're born with, it's also the lived experience that women have. And I think it does lead you to being in a different place from men that might have an identical education. And that allows us to bring perspectives that are slightly different and probably lead to solutions that are going to be more comprehensive for the rest of the world. Examples abound of where things have been tailored for men, because there really wasn't any consideration of anything being a product that fitted all of humanity, right? So I think thinking about this, being intentional about it, is an important part of making sure that the mistakes we've had in the past are not necessarily repeated in the future. It's not easy, but I do think that an active measurement engagement is absolutely critical. I think one of the things that you were pointing out about women in IT and women in banking leading in India, I used to think that for us middle class people, the ones who go to IITs and CMCs of the world, that girls and boys were equal. Certainly in my family, I always felt like that. And in CMC, which is an institution that was started by a woman, I always felt like this was absolutely equal. And then I had this opportunity, because I got a grant, to actually measure what was happening in terms of leadership positions, career pathways, what happened to alumni, and found that despite the fact that you would think every enabling mechanism was there, there was a leaky pipeline, there was a lack of advancement. And to me, the biggest insight from that is if we are not measuring it, we won't see it. That's why I think making sure that we have data and we track that data and we use goals that we have said, saying this is what we hope to achieve in 5 or 10 years, becomes really important. What if we were to say within the IITs, there must be 5 women directors in the next 5 years or 10 years? It'll transform the IITs.
Good insight. Actually, what you're saying is right. From my own experience, I will tell you, at Infosys in the late 90s, we looked at women in our workforce, and we found it was around 17-18%. And initial reaction was, if you look at engineering colleges, average percentage of women were about around 20% actually. And we could have said, okay, so we kind of mirror that. But then we took a target to double the number of women workforce. And over the next 10 years, the percentage of women went up to about 35% actually, because we measured and we took proactive steps. We created a women inclusivity network. Every policy was taken through this network to ensure that it's women friendly. We took proactive steps for women to work from home or women to work from a city office rather than travel to electronic city. So many things we did, and those steps allowed us to come to about 35%. I don't know what the percentage is today, but I would assume that it's about 35% now in the IT industry by and large. And I think the work from home and work from anywhere also probably will help women to contribute more, and I hope that is sustained. Hybrid mode of working is sustained going forward. I just want to very quickly ask one more question, which I believe is very important. If moderator Nishani, if we can have one more question.
Sure.
I strongly feel that the diversity that India has, and of course the large population that is there in India, allows us to contribute to global science in a very unique way. I also believe that if you want solutions that are affordable, then India must be part of the research effort, because cost of doing research in India is significantly lower. So I strongly feel that India has to play a bigger role in global science. What do you think? And how can we make it up? Of course, make it brief, because Nishani probably wants to ask now questions.
Well, we are 1/6 of the world's population. So, 1 in 6 people in the world is Indian. Now, if we look at the quality of our science, you look at any Western university, you're going to have Indian scientists there. A lot of them went there because they wanted to compete internationally and because of the ease of doing science. There is no reason why we cannot do the same quality of work in India if we set our minds to it. We've looked at our institutions and they perform well. But a lot of institutions like IIT Madras are now being intentional about ensuring that they move up in the rankings. And while rankings are one measure of an institution, they do require a certain amount of effort to be made for people within that institution to grow. So I think setting goals like this is very important. And I completely agree with you that if you want strong science and you want affordable products, then India has to be part of that global picture. So if the conversation is about balance in STEM, we started with local and global, and it has to be both.
Yes. Okay, Nishani, now I think we are ready for questions. And if there are no questions, then we will continue our dialogue.
We do have a few questions. I think this is the conversation on privacy, data sets, evolved energy solutions, and integrated thinking between the IT industry and the sciences were thought-provoking indeed. And also Kris mentioning the consequences of every action and the learnings from nature as well. The balance between nature and human technology and the fact that there is no going back. So yes, Professor Gagandeep, there's one question to you. You did touch about women in leadership positions and bringing perspectives to this topic. So what are your top 2 to 3 recommendations for ensuring there are more women in STEM and in these leadership positions?
I think one of the most important things that women don't get is mentorship, and making sure that we have mentoring networks that are specifically meant for women to grow from an early stage in their career is absolutely critical. We need to think about that. You also need to, there is a lot of things that the government does in terms of leave and, making sure that, You regulate that there is a creche at every institution. These are important things. Making life easier for women is important. But to me, mentoring and flexibility are the two key things that you can do for women. For society and the organization as a whole, measurement and tracking. You're on mute, Nishani.
Thank you for that. Just one more question about, we were talking about what international universities are doing and what Indian universities are doing, and also in organizations. So what has India done right that we should do more of?
In education or in industry? In education, our post-school education in centers of excellence like the IITs is such a solid foundation. How much of it is because the best students come to you, and how much of it is because of the training that you offer? You need to be able to measure. And I'm not sure that people really focus on doing that. You know, India has such a humongous population. So if only the best are coming to you, would they have done equally well in another institution? What did you contribute to their growth? So I think that's something that we do need to be thinking about from a point of view of education, about what works. When it comes to industry, what did we do right for industry? I think Kris is better positioned to answer that.
You know, if we create a globally competitive industry, and if you have the confidence to compete with the best, actually we can do well. And you know, in the last few years, in the last 5-6 years, we have focused on supporting startups, right? Of course, you know, becoming a unicorn is really not the end of the game. You know, we need to create, you know, we need to create organizations that are long term, and organizations that that are there for maybe 50, 100 years in institution building. But you know, just looking at you know, the number of unicorns, the amount of money that we have been able to attract, I believe that you know, we are in a very good position, because many of these companies will continue to grow, will become global companies, and that's going to benefit India in many ways, actually. And in fact, you know, I was thinking aloud today on Twitter that you know, if our startup ecosystem is able to attract $40-50 billion of funding, international funding, why not our research ecosystem? We should prepare our research ecosystem to attract similar amount of funding. Our scientists, I think part of the time they should act like entrepreneurs in being able to attract funding, etc. And set ambitious goals, which also attract funding, etc. So I believe if we set our goals to be internationally competitive, being world class, I think we can achieve that. ISRO is a good example of a government organization that has achieved it. So both in the private sector as well as in the public sector, we can actually achieve you know, goals that we set ourselves for. And so we need to set ambitious goals and go after them.
My next question was very much in line with that. What is your opinion about artificial intelligence and bias in AI? How important is that for India? And can India become a leader in this domain?
So, you know, it's very important. You know, that I don't have any doubt in saying, actually, you know, very, very important, because it's a new paradigm in computing. See, the traditional mode of computing is you tell the computer what to do and the computer strictly follows those instructions. Whereas in the paradigm of AI, the computer tells you what needs to be done. So you can now solve problems that hitherto were not solvable because it's too complex and we couldn't figure out what is the right solution, etc. But now you throw the power of the computing to find the solution, and then of course you can run the solution many times afterwards. So this is good for pattern recognition, image translation, language translation. So many tasks hitherto that were not being able to be done can now be done, and I think it is definitely already have had an impact in solving complex problems, etc. What role India can play? I think we need to, just like in computer science, we created programs early on. I think we need to create programs starting from school level to teach them about the new paradigm of computing. We need to have advanced courses in our institutions of higher learning, and we need to invest in research in AI, and we need to apply the AI in solving, which I believe is already being done, in solving real life problems and things like that. So if we do all that stuff, we can take advantage of this opportunity. Where we are missing is deep tech research. We don't have the capacity that we require. We have very few people who are really good in AI, etc., in our academic institutions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. One more question for you, Kris. Kris, you're a big support of research in India through your philanthropy. What is the right balance between basic research and translational work? Are there any areas where Indian research can become wide world leading?
See, it's very early right now to talk about balance in research, because we need to do more of both. More of basic research and more of translational or applied research. We are not doing enough of it. And see, I feel that basic research is long-term. It's very unpredictable. We can't set time frames. We don't know when a breakthrough will happen. So typically, government or philanthropy supports basic research. And translational research, applied research is typically supported by industry, because they look for a solution in 3 to 5 year time frame. So we need to increase the funding and the capacity in both of these. And we need to set ambitious goals. We need to have larger teams working on these goals. See, now, Gagandeep, you can come in. Typically, what is research today is one professor, one PhD student, a budget of 10 lakhs. They publish a paper, the student gets a PhD, everybody is happy. They go on to do the next micro problem. The teacher gets evaluated based on the number of papers published. Student goes on to do something else, and that's okay. I don't have anything against that, but there has to be somebody who says, well, let's create large teams. Let's look at ambitious programs. Let's solve the challenge faced by dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, big problems. And these require large teams, multidisciplinary teams, guaranteed funding for 10, 15 years, big budget, all that stuff. And we need to do more of that. Of course, I'm talking about healthcare because Gagandeep is there, but this can be taken to any other area, actually, electric vehicles or alternate fuels or, things like that, actually. Gagandeep, if you want to come in, I know, maybe you will say I'm wrong.
No, I think the problem of critical mass in an area is a really big one. You have one expert in this, one expert in that. When that expert retires, the field is gone. That's a ridiculous way to function. What you really need is people who work in complementary areas to address the same problem. what Kris said. You need teams of people that approach big problems from different directions in order to be able to bring the best of their expertise to areas that they know. But the Indian ecosystem, at least in terms of academic research funding, does not support team research. It supports the individual. So that devolves on one person, one PhD student, one postdoc if you're lucky, and short projects, and on to the next project. That is no way, that creates some level of manpower. And depending on the institution, that manpower may or may not be competent. But I think if we really want to take on big problems, we have to think about the critical mass issue. And the second thing we have to think about is making sure that you involve public and private sector together. Because when it becomes a purely public sector approach, there are lots of barriers to getting stuff done in the public sector academic institution that are not necessarily the same in the private institutions. One example is sequencing. The country gets told to sequence more, but there is a rule placed by the government saying you can't buy foreign reagents. Now, the long-term solution is to make sure that you're not using proprietary foreign reagents in any case, but that's not the short-term solution when you need to get work done. And thinking about how you solve problems like this, it could be done through ensuring that every large program that you set up is not limited to the public sector. So I think there are lots of things that we need to think about, but scale is one of the biggest issues that we have in moving things forward seriously.
We'll just take a few questions from our chat, if it's okay. To have sustained research does not require sustained funding. If this is ensured, then probably the institutions also look for sustained team and progressive research. I think that was for what you were saying.
It's a comment on the last question, but absolutely. You need funding at scale, and you have to decide, you can't have a one size fits all for every research project. So, for example, I've sat on funding committees where it says, this committee can fund up to 85 lakhs. So everybody who applies to that committee will write a project for 84.5 lakhs. Okay. It could be a big problem. It could be a little problem, but the application they make is the same. And they will apply for 3 years of funding. And then you'll have people on the committee who say, oh, but they're asking for 4 manpower when that project asks for 2 manpower. I mean, come on. You can't think that every problem in research can be addressed exactly the same way. So you can't have cookie cutter grant projects. And we have examples of where it is well done. The India Alliance, which is between the Wellcome Trust and the DBT, took lessons from the Wellcome Trust in how to manage grants. And they have been able to identify good researchers and fund good programs. So we should take lessons from good examples that we have in the country. But so far, not many of our funding agencies do that.
Right. One question to you, Kris. What is going to take doing big problem-focused research despite long timelines and fear of failure? By Raghu Dharmaraju.
Yeah, so clearly, as I said, we need to look at philanthropic funding, maybe CSR funding from industry, as well as government funding. These have goals that are probably aligned to basic research. When it comes to long term, what happens is towards or closer to finding a solution, industry will come in. They may come in early on, maybe with very small amount of funding, just to say that they are interested in this area. But then as you start getting closer to solutions, you will see tremendous interest from industry. And then the transition happens to funding primarily by industry or private sources. That's the model I think we should look at this point. Yes, Gagandeep.
Nishani, if I can just add to that. I think one is understanding where de-risking is required and where failure is acceptable. I think for a lot of our early stage funding, which must come, as Kris had said previously, from government or from philanthropy, we should have a higher appetite for failure, where we should say, if you're taking risk with this project, it's perfectly acceptable for you to take the risk, as long as you do what you're doing really well, so that we get a clear no in this area, right? And as he said, the appetite for risk in industry that has to deliver on its investment is lower. And that's the right way. But the ecosystem needs to have all parts to it. So, without risk, there isn't success.
You know, I've been of late talking about you know, startup-like mentality for research. And startups get funded by venture community, which is risk funding. So they are willing to accept that 7 out of 10 startups will fail, right? So we need a new category of funding that will come into research, and which is like, you know, risk funding. And they know that if they fund 10 ideas, maybe 7 will fail, 3 will succeed, and those 3 will give them the returns that are necessary. So we need to now think about research very similar to how we think about supporting startups, etc. Similar mechanisms of funding. So you fund 10 ideas, and then if, let's say, 2 or 3 succeed, they'll give you the returns that you expect. So I think this is the idea that we need to develop when it comes to research funding from private sources.
I think that was a different take on the research and funding altogether. But I think we've passed our time slot, and I think this was a great conversation. I think if we could go on, it would be great. But we have to kind of conclude this session. But thank you. Sincere thanks from IITMAA to both of you. I request Krishnan to come on and say a few words.
Right. Thanks, Nishani. Of course, you know, this is a fascinating discussion. Thank you, Professor Kang and Kris. There are many, many more questions I think that I can see there, and we wish this goes on for more time. But really, this is a wonderful conversation. I have taken copious notes. If I were to conclude, and I'm just going to take some. I think what you discussed were several kinds of imbalances that you were trying to discuss. Develop local capabilities, you know, versus international research. The balance between privacy and sharing. You know, in fact, there's a balance between human ingenuity and nature's evolutionary capabilities. So several imbalances that you discussed. I'm going to pick on 2 or 3 solutions that you highlighted. I'm glad you talked about women in STEM as an answer to all, you know, to at least one powerful answer to many of these imbalances. The fact that they are wired differently, not just from birth, but because of lived journey experiences, and this point about mentorship networks and flexibility, you know, for women, and measurement and tracking for society and corporates. That's great. Professor Kang, you made those points. Kris, I think there was a very interesting point where you talked about startup ecosystem has attracted 40, 50 billion. How can we get the research ecosystem to attract the new kind of investment, and how do we get that mentality? There was a very interesting thoughts. Of course, I'm not trying to summarize all the points. I think they were like these highlights packages where every comment is like a 4 or 6er. So I'll request the people to go and you know, maybe review this video again. But once again, on behalf of the IIT Madras Alumni Association, thank you so much for your time today and the wonderful ideas that you shared.
Thank you, Gagandeep. Thank you, Krishnan. Thank you, Nishani, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Kris, and thanks everybody for having us on and for the preparation before, which ultimately we didn't use the bulk of, but thank you. It set the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.